Welcome, I'm Sacha King from 221 Mental Health Charity, a trainer, social worker and managing director there. Today we're going to be talking about early intervention skills with young people, and we're going to be covering adolescent development and how the youth brain impacts our conversations, having calming conversations with young people and regulation, and also open questioning. So hi everyone, I'm Sacha. I'm going to be taking you through this morning where we're going to be talking about really some strategies to have meaningful conversations with young people. We're going to be using motivational interviewing as our structure, but we're going to be doing some simple techniques that might make your conversations a little bit deeper, a little bit more purposeful, and guiding towards setting some very manageable goals for young people. We'll also talk about some strategies to engage young people because they are pretty tricky sometimes to have meaningful conversations with. So there's a few things we need to do before we start having those conversations. So I work for 221 Mental Health Charity. We're a small organisation in the Northern Territory, and we just do mental health education and awareness across the territory, really focusing on practical training and education and filling some of those gaps that we might have in the territory. This training is for people working in the area, and it is really for your conversations that you're having day to day. Throughout the training you're going to make up a case study, so in your tables you're going to think about what sort of young people do you work with and try and apply these skills to your make-up case study, and that means that you can really think about what are some of the issues or the challenges or the behaviours or the things that young people do want to change in their life, and how can we facilitate conversations around those. It's important to understand a bit about adolescent development before we start talking about conversations, because what starts to happen, and I think people have got a little bit of knowledge in this room already just because of the things that you wrote down on your papers. So what starts to happen is when we're a little kid, or when we're kind of primary school age before adolescence, we're a little kid, we just kind of go with what people tell us, and generally we find that adults, we believe they're telling us the truth, and that we kind of believe the values that our family has, the ways that people around us live are the right ways to live. And we just assume these things just because in our brains we're not really cognitively or critically thinking about what's going on. And then we get to kind of like that 12 years old, and suddenly we start to think, hey, my friends aren't doing the same things that I'm doing. Why do I have these responsibilities? Or my friends' families don't have these value sets. Or I'm getting frustrated that these sorts of things are going on in my home and I don't think they're right. So you're actually getting to a point where you're starting to think about individually as a person, not as a family user, not as a community group, as an individual. What do I like, and what do I think is right, and what do I think I should do in my life? As you get a little bit stronger in that independence, this creates a lot of family conflict. Even in the best, healthiest family, we have conflict in the adolescent years. And that's just because these parents, or these carers, or these guardians of this person have said, you know, I've raised you in a way that I think is the best, or I've done the best of my ability, and these are the values that I've said are ones that we live by. And then suddenly a young person says, actually, I don't agree with those values. Actually, maybe you're not right the way that you did that. Actually, maybe I'm going to Google that because I don't think that's the correct answer. And suddenly that young person is talking back, and they're taking on a role, and they're not believing what you said, and as a parent, you're not the holder of information anymore. This is a really big change in a family dynamic. So even in the healthiest families, we see conflict. Then obviously in families that don't have as healthy relationships, or as healthy of a lifestyle, or maybe have some relationship problems or conflict in them, that young person even more so says, I don't like the way that you live your life, I don't believe you're doing it the right way, or I don't want to be a part of this, or I don't want to live by your values. And when our values are crossed, that's when it really is hurtful. And when your children cross your values, that's even more hurtful for people. So it's a really hard time for families. That's not young people trying to be argumentative, that's young people exploring the world. They're trying to work out, what do I like, what don't I like? And in our adolescence years is the time that we experiment around what I like, what I don't like, what are my interests. And you'll see that adolescents and teenagers, they do tend to find things that they're really passionate about. And we try different things. And also what happens in our brain in our adolescence is that we get really connected to the things that we're passionate about, and we learn them really well, and we generally remember those skills for life. So what our brain does when we become teenagers is that when we're a kid, we're a tree growing and our branches are going in every single direction possible, and they're taking in every single bit of information, and we're growing branches everywhere. It's a bit of a messy bush. And then as soon as we get into our adolescence, we start to prune some of those leaves. And that pruning is saying, this is what I'm interested in and this is what I'm not interested in. And the skills that we learn in our adolescence are ones that generally stick with us throughout our life. That's quite often also, though, when we have insecurities, those insecurities first started in our adolescence. When we learn coping strategies, we probably learnt a lot of coping strategies in our adolescence, and we go back to them, whether they're positive or negative. So, you know, thinking about managing stress and how you learnt to do that in your adolescence, you might have learnt some unhealthy ways, because when we're an adolescent or a teenager, we like quick fixes. So we all probably have a couple of unhealthy ways we learn to cope with emotional distress or stress when we're in our adolescence, and they're going to stick there. We're going to remember them because of this way that our brain was formed. The other thing that happens is that our brain starts to connect with that part that makes us do critical thinking, reflecting, and problem solving. So sometimes teenagers, they act quite emotional, they act a little bit childlike in the way that they're just getting upset or getting frustrated or getting angry really quickly. But then other times you have a conversation with that same young person and you're like, wow, that was such an amazing conversation. I really connected with them. I'm really proud of how that they were able to describe that situation. And that's really because the time that they were able to really describe things, to problem solve things, to reflect on things, they probably connected with the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain, which is developing, and it's getting wired in our teenage years. We still sometimes disconnect from this front part of our brain. That's like when we might get in an argument with someone and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said those things. They don't fit my values. Or why did I get angry at that thing? I don't even care about that thing. That's because you disconnected from that front part of your brain. It happens sometimes. And you went back to that emotional part of the brain. So people might have seen Flip Your Lid before, this theory of the brain. And it's really simple, the hand model. So it pretty much says we have three parts to our brain. We have the oldest part of our brain is the survival part of our brain. This says that I need to eat, sleep, reproduce, and survive in general. My organs need to work, things like that. The next part is our emotional part of the brain. This says, controls my emotion, my responses, and actually says, is this dangerous or isn't this dangerous? So this is what a young person's brain is. And then as we get into our adolescence and our adulthood, we put a little cap on top and we say, does this fit who I am? Are these the values I want to live by? Am I responding in the correct way? What are the consequences to this? And just remembering for teenagers, this isn't well connected. So sometimes it's going up and sometimes it's going down. For people with trauma, especially young people with trauma, we say like that lid is almost halfway there because the world has taught them this place is a little bit more dangerous. I should be ready for something to go wrong. And people and things are not trustworthy because things haven't been trustworthy in my life or things have been dangerous in my life. So I need to be ready to go into survival or emotional response really quickly. So you'll see with trauma, people who've experienced trauma, that one will go up and down quite quickly. And there's less time and ability to respond because if it's all the way down here, we have a little bit more capacity to respond. So just being aware of that. I can't use the rest of my brain, okay? I'm only going to be able to respond with survival instincts. If my emotional part of my brain is ignited, I can't critically think about things, reflect, or problem solve. So if my prefrontal cortex, or my critical thinking part of my brain, is there, I'm calm, I'm able to critically think, I'm able to take more responsibilities on, I'm able to be a little bit challenged because I'm connecting to that front part of my brain. So we want young people to be coming up with their own answers, we want young people to be reflecting on their lives, and we want young people to be able to problem solve on their own. For them to have the ability to do those things, we need to make sure that they're in contact with that front part of the brain. It's there for young people, it just needs a little bit of time and resources to be able to connect it. So something that you might do to help a young person connect is help them regulate in some way, and we'll talk about regulation in a minute. You might want to ask them some questions that get them to be a little bit reflective or descriptive, so telling a story, describing something, asking questions that get them to tell you details about something. Those sorts of things can be really good to engage that part of the brain. Or just getting them calm. So you need to be calm to access that part of the brain, otherwise you're emotional, aren't you? What sort of things are going to make someone emotional? What about in environments? What sort of environments might sort of trigger a young person? School, yep.
A learning environment.
Any sort of learning environment, yep. Getting them to write something down maybe if they're not very good at writing. Yep, so having the space too small itself or too many people around, yep. What about in communication? Yeah, absolutely. And not understanding, it could be a language barrier, it could be that they don't understand what you're asking them to do, it could be many things about them not understanding. So we're going to do an activity now and think about some of these things that might get a young person, might trigger a young person to get emotional or flip their lid. What I want us to do, so each group's going to go to one of the papers around the room. You're going to write what might be a trigger under those headings. We've got times of the day or the year. We've got environment, so thinking about actually what is that environment. We've got communication, the way we communicate with a young person. And we've got activities, so asking them to do something or engage in a workshop or something like that. What are some of the things that might trigger them around those things? I also want to hear why. So I don't want you just to write mornings, because mornings just mornings. It's not a trigger unless there's something around mornings. So why might mornings be a trigger for a young person? Impacting their ability to sleep or their choice to choose their schedule. What's another reason mornings might be a trigger? Yeah, they're thinking about school and they don't want to go. Yeah. So thinking about food and that they don't have breakfast or that they're hungry. Yeah. Also just someone telling them what to do quite often, just having an adult in their presence in the morning when you're sleepy and you're grumpy, can just be triggering to have an adult come into that space too early in the morning. They're not ready to communicate, those sorts of things. So I want you to say what is the trigger, but also why are the reasons that it's a trigger. Quite a few themes through all of these sort of different topics that we have around the room and that everyone came up with. And some of those themes might be feeling judged or also that being told what to do, and we heard that, and that authoritarian sort of style of working with young people. We can see that being a big trigger for lots of young people. Being asked direct questions as well. We know that young people quite often will answer incorrectly rather than answering the question. So you've asked young people a question before and they just say yes or no to get you to go away because they're feeling uncomfortable, rather than actually answering that question of what they want to do, or even sometimes simply being asked, what do you want to have for lunch, and they just say anything possible to stop the conversation. So really being aware of asking direct questions, and instead of asking a direct question which could be like a single answer or can feel quite confronting, getting a young person again to describe or tell a story is it's much nicer conversation, and you can get a little bit more information from that young person. Feeling disrespected, high expectations, so that young person feeling like I have to, for example, do well in this activity or this sport, or I have to live by these rules, or in Dondale, actually knowing that they've got a schedule that they're going to have to live by and not feeling like maybe they could do that. Restricting coping strategies, obviously sometimes access to, for example, substances, access to time away, access to control of their situation so they can manage their emotions and they can cope is a really big one. And interesting to sort of weigh up is that if someone's coping strategy is substances, how do you know, within our programs we can't let them have substances, but how can we manage around this if this is going to be a trigger? They're feeling like you're restricting them from their coping strategy, just being aware of that one. And injustices is a huge one. I think I heard it discussed a few times, feeling like one young person is getting treated differently, someone has privileges and I don't, that I'm always getting in trouble even though it's a bunch of people also doing these behaviours. So, you know, those sorts of injustices are a really big trigger for young people. And so these are sort of themes that we see through all different areas of a young person's life and environments. And I think that really got identified as well. So we're thinking about triggers, thinking about the young people that you work with. You know some of their triggers and some of the environments you work in. We also know some of the issues coming up for the young people that you work with and some of the challenges in their life. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make our case studies, our young people, and we're going to describe them, and we're going to work out what are their triggers and what are their calming or their liked environments and ways to have conversations. So we're going to start making our worksheets. So what we're going to do is you'll each have a worksheet. Adele, could you help hand these out, please? And you will, first we're going to do down the bottom here. We're going to ask the questions what does a young person talk about? What do they act like? What do they care about? Who do they live with? What do they want to change? Like, is there a little bit of saying, like, I don't like that I do this, or I don't like that I respond like this, or I don't like this one thing in my life? And what is it will not change is the last one. So is there any boundaries of saying, like, actually, I will not stop being with friends. I will not stop living in Darwin. I will not do something that's going to impact my ability to get substances. What are sort of their boundaries? I will not move out of home, or I would never move back to home. You know, what are those boundaries there for that young person? And you can also do their triggers and likes on there as well. And obviously make them a little person with your little foam pieces as well. So you've got an idea of who is this young person, what's going on in their life, and a little bit of an idea of something that they don't like about themselves or their life or something around them, because we're going to work with that little bit of maybe I don't like this, or maybe my life would be a bit easier if this changed. Because when we talk about motivational interviewing, it's really important that that person has got a tiny bit of hope that things could be better if something changed. They don't have to say, yes, I'm going to do this and this is how I'm going to do it. That's not really how conversations start around motivational interviewing. It's just that person says, I'm unhappy with this one thing, or I get frustrated by this one thing. And that's enough to start the conversation. If we don't have that and that person isn't going to talk about their life in those ways, we're probably not at the step, or that person's not ready. We might need to engage longer in the engagement step of motivational interviewing, which is our first step when we're just gaining a relationship and trust before that person wants to change. Change doesn't have to be huge. We all do change. We all continuously have things in our life that could be better, or we could live healthier, our relationships could be better. So if you think about change, everyone's had a moment. Think about a moment in your life where you're like, hey, if I did this, my life would be easier or healthier or simpler, or this would be positive for me. How long did it take between that thought and actually implementing that change? Long time?
45 years.
Yeah, 45 years, yeah, absolutely. Other people still in this ambivalence time? This saying, I'm still thinking about going to the gym. I'm still thinking about, I'm still thinking about changing, setting up direct debits in my accounts and setting them up. I'm still thinking about, doing an emotion chart with my kids, because I think that would be helpful. I know it's a good idea, but actually implementing that change takes time. And something about motivational interviewing, which is, I think, one of the best things about it, is it actually recognises that ambivalence, which is the time between when you know something would be good for you and until you actually implement it. And we all take time, and we need to respect that time and recognise that, you know, we need to take those steps and we need to slowly implement it, and we need to explore what change means for each person. So we do this thing called change talk. And change talk is when we're just sort of weighing up the pros, the cons, the questions, trying to think, is this what I'd like to do or how I'd like to do it, or why am I not doing it? And we actually just encourage that change talk, whether it's good or bad. We don't just need to be totally positive and say, this is going to be amazing and work out so well and this is the steps I'm going to take. Because we have our own barriers in the way. We have our own thoughts, we have our own worries, and also there's sometimes practical things in the way. I need some resources before I can do that. I need finances before I can do that. I need some courage before I can do that. So recognising these steps it takes to have change. Motivational interviewing is really good for young people because it really respects them in the process and it really empowers them in the process. So it's not telling them what to do, it's enhancing their ability to change and them coming up with a small step to do that change. So remembering it really takes time to implement that change, and we'll take our time around it. Our 4 processes for motivational interviewing. There's heaps of different models out there for motivational interviewing, but they all have these 4 processes. The first one is engaging, and this is really just building the relationship. And we actually already started engaging. We started engaging by firstly recognising, you know, who this person is and, you know, what sort of things do we know about them. So we started the process in our own thought pattern of with your case studies. And then we also started to recognise what sort of environment that they would like to have. This is also a part of engaging. The next section of engaging we're going to talk about is actually starting these conversations and having some open questions and relationship building. So engaging, we don't do any talk about change in engaging, we're just building relationship. Then we move up to focusing, and focusing we can start to ask a little bit deeper questions, get to know a bit more about this person and a little bit more about their lives, what they're interested in and what they do and don't like right now. We also want to use sort of some reflective statements here to get them to really be honest with us and continue the conversation. Then we're going to do evoking, and this is really doing that talk around change. And the last one is planning, and we're actually just going to use one of our SMART goals. I know people have probably used SMART goals 100 times before, and people tell you to do them all the time, and you can kind of roll your eyes. But they're really, really effective after having a conversation with someone to set a goal, but also to make sure that goal is one goal. Quite often we set goals that are like multiple things in once. So it'll be like control your finances. And to do that, you need to set up this payment, you need to buy groceries, you need to pay these bills. Well, that's multiple goals. One goal would be pay your bills. One goal would be buy groceries each week. One goal would be set up a direct debit. Because if I set up a direct debit and I buy groceries, but I haven't paid for my bills, I feel like I didn't complete that goal, but I completed 2 parts of it. So we want to make sure the goal's small enough that we can actually celebrate that goal with that person, and then they can set another goal and they can do that, and then we can celebrate it. When we're celebrating goals and achievements, what happens is that little voice in our head, it speaks to us and it says, yeah, you did it, you're awesome, congratulations. If we get 2 out of those 3 goals, even though it's 3/4 or 2/3 of what we actually aim to do, it's still quite a lot. What do we say to ourselves? You didn't do it. It's not good enough. You can't do anything right. So a really big difference in the way we treat ourselves and our thoughts if we set multiple goals within one SMART goal. So making sure it's really small, it's really achievable, and it's celebrated afterwards. So also when you set a goal here, it needs to be something that they have individual control over. So it can't be that, what did someone do in another course? They said, oh, they want to go to a friend's house once a week. And I said, well, that's something good, but it's really not controlled by the individual. Something might be they want to improve a relationship with someone, or they want to communicate better with their friends and family, or they want to try something new or talk to a person. All of those things around socialization they have control over. But if it's going somewhere else that they don't have control over, especially like staying with a friend, there's so many things that can get in the way of that. So we really want them to have individual control over their goal, and it has to be something something that they can do and feel good about. So those are our processes, and for us as the person having this conversation, we need to make sure that our conversation, the way we're having this conversation, is really respectful, and it's really just empowering that person's thought and ability to have all these different neural processes going on and all these new ways of thinking about their life and their ability to change. So let's continue with engaging. So we've done creating a comfortable environment by thinking about what sort of environment do they like. We are going to work on doing some regulation with a young person and creating some open questions. So for regulation, we're going to go back to the brain. If a young person is triggered, they are unable to have these sorts of conversations. So we're going to do things that calm them. You always do things that calm young people. I'm sure you probably have things that you have conversations, you talk to them about things that they like, you let them put on music or things like that. So we have like conversational ways that create connection. And the reasons that those things create connection is that when someone feels listened to and respected and heard, and that someone's interested in them, their mind says, hey, you're a part of my tribe, I'm listened to, I'm cared for, and your brain says, okay, people like me, I'm safe, and it releases a tiny bit of chemical into your body that says, yeah, I'm good, I'm safe, I'm loved. Okay, so we have this chemical when we feel connected, because underneath it all, we are, hunters and gatherers, and we're looking for our tribe, and our tribe of people that we feel connected with. And so when someone really listens to you and respects you, you feel like, yeah, that's my tribe, I'm safe. So that's one way of creating connection. But you probably all know that way of creating connection, just talking about things that a young person likes, gaining rapport with them. Another way to do this is through a very old way of calming, and they're called brainstem calmers. So these are ways of calming that use movement and rhythm to actually calm your whole body. They're very old and they're very instinctive, and they can feel like not like a strategy if someone's all the way up here, they're very emotional or they're stressing out. Brainstem calmers are ways that we can co-regulate really well. So they actually go back to that brainstem and they make us self-soothing things. So a good way to think about this is if you hold a baby, what do you do to soothe that baby? You rock it. And rocking a baby is a movement that's repetitive. Or you might rock yourself when you're feeling stressed sometimes too. What else could you do with a baby that's going to soothe it? Sorry? Yeah, so we vocally can do something that's rhythmic, yep. Do some little shh, or we can do a little hum or sing a little song. And it's normally like a rhyme or something like that as well, and it's very rhythmic. And so it's a rhythmic sound, again, a repetitive rhythmic movement or sound. What's the other thing you do with a baby? It's holding it and you're giving it a pat. And that's very rhythmic pat, isn't it? It's not weird things that you do on that feels weird, doesn't it? It'd be strange to hit a baby in not a rhythmic pattern. That rhythmic pattern, again, is self-soothing. Sometimes you even see people tap themselves to self-soothe as well. Again, a rhythmic movement, a repetitive movement, a rhythmic sound. Any of these things. So can anyone think creatively how you could have a repetitive sound or movement that a young person might enjoy? Yeah, you could give them a stress ball and they could hold that. And you see that sometimes with young people with sensory stuff. They're They're just squeezing it and sort of just regulating themselves. What else could you do? What about this one? Is that a repetitive movement? Just walking with a young person. Rather than sitting down, you know, we're going to move our bodies and we're going to walk with that young person while we are having the conversation. It's actually self-soothing for both of us, and it feels really natural, and it makes that conversation more organic. Anyone throwing a ball back and forth while having a conversation? Really helpful one. Anyone have fitness balls in their office? Or in the places that they are? Maybe not at the shack, not a great idea. But yeah. As long as it's not causing any harm, but yeah, just stretching something. Or even just having something that you can rhythmically play with on the table. If you can have fitness balls where you have rooms, just sitting on that fitness ball, you'll see that young person actually does a rhythmic movement while having a conversation, and it's really soothing. And what it does is it soothes the brain without them recognising. So their ability to actually hold that conversation and be able to stay in a point where their brain is all connected is really increased. So you'll see if you use a brainstem calmer while having a conversation, it's really good. You can also use music in general. So you could play music if that's a possibility, but you could also put on music with a strong beat or bass in the background. So rap music is really good, but sometimes triggering because of the language or the memories attached to that rap music. So you can use things like some like deep house music or something like that. Normally not triggering, but having that, but cool enough for young people to keep it on. It's not, language isn't normally triggering for young people. So something like that can be good just to have on in the background. Now, we've made a connection, we've regulated them, we're moving together, they're feeling pretty good, their brain's all connected together, their prefrontal cortex is kicked in. So we're going to start having a conversation now with this young person. So we are going to use our AADANT values when we start having a conversation with a young person. Open questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. AADANT is the values of motivational interviewing, and you can use them anytime throughout your conversation. We're going to practice them as a part of a conversation in this training, but if you're using motivational interviewing in your day-to-day, you can use them at any time. So we'll learn what each of those are in a moment. It's really nice that they're called oars, because oars is like what you drive a boat with, or what you push a boat with, and that you control those oars. And it's really about saying, using these types of statements and using these values lets the person have control of the conversation, and you're there just to help them reflect. So those are your oars values. So let's think of some open questions. We're not going to talk about open questioning for too long because it's a pretty simple concept, and I'm sure you all know what open questions are. So open questions helps the person explore their thoughts, and we really want that person to be either descriptive or telling a story when they're answering that question. So open questions aren't only questions that can't be answered with yes or no, but they also can't be answered with a single word. So we really want them to have to describe or tell us something for the answer. So normally open questions start with why, how, what, describe, explain, tell me about, what do you think about, these sorts of things. And I actually feel less confronting. Even though they're more complex, they feel less confronting than a yes or no, because it's a flexible answer, isn't it? And it's a respectful question because it can go anywhere for that young person. And really think about your wording with open questions as well. I don't want you to be like, how was your day? I want you to say, hey, tell me about lunchtime at school. When you got up this morning, what was happening in your house, if they live in their house. Tell me about last time that you went camping, if you know they like going camping. Get them to tell you something rather than just say, oh, my day was good, it was fine, or young people will avoid questions and conversations a lot of the time. So work out ways you can have open questions that actually get them to explain something to you, and you can continue that conversation. And it can be about anything at all. So let's come up with a few open questions that we could ask our young person. It's going to make them feel comfortable and just tell us a bit more about their day, their life, themselves. So I hope you've learned a few skills around engaging with young people. From the information that we've gone through in this session, you can fill out 3 sections on your worksheet. The first section that I'd like you to fill out is creating comfort. In this section, under triggers, you can write things that might trigger a young person to flip their lid or go into an emotional response. And also fill out the likes side. The likes is things that are going to be helpful for them having that conversation, such as what environment, is it one-on-one, and what sort of communication style would they like. The next section I'd like you to fill out is regulation. So using our brainstem calmers, how could you use movement or rhythm to help co-regulate with that young person and create a meaningful conversation, such as going for a walk together, throwing a ball, or putting in some music in the background. And the third section that I'd like you to fill out is open questions. Thinking of 3 questions that you could ask the young people that you work with that are open, so you can't answer them with a single word, that are not leading or judgmental, and also get the young person to be descriptive or tell you a story with the answer. These skills will help you think about ways to engage with young people and start a really strong connection with them.